I used to think loyalty mattered. That if you showed up early, stayed late, volunteered for the miserable projects no one else wanted, someone up top would notice. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow. But eventually, someone would say, "Hey, this guy's one of the good ones." For 6 years, I worked at Hexler Solutions, a mid-sized software company that prided itself on family values and employee well-being. Every Monday morning, we got chirpy emails about wellness tips. Every Friday, someone from HR would post photos of smiling employees around the office bulletin boards, like we were exhibits at some corporate zoo. I hated the phoniness, but I played along. You had to. My boss, Mr. Callahan, was the embodiment of that culture. All shiny smiles and empty promises. He shook your hand too firmly, laughed half a second too long at jokes, and asked about your weekend plans while already glancing at his phone. Still, compared to some of the horror stories I'd heard about other companies, Hexler seemed like a place you could build a life. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. Outside of work, my real world was shrinking. My dad, Alan, lived 2 towns over, in the same house where I grew up. After my mom passed away when I was 16, it had just been the 2 of us. For years, we were a team. A lopsided one, maybe, with him handling most of the hard stuff while I fumbled toward adulthood. Even after I moved out, he was my touchstone. The guy who could fix a leaky faucet over the phone, who would drive 2 hours just to help me move apartments, who always knew when something was wrong without me saying a word. But life got busy. "Maybe next weekend, Dad?" I muttered too many times over the phone. "I just have so much work piling up." I sighed too often. "It's okay, kiddo," he said warmly each time. "I'll be here," he reassured, and somehow that made it worse. It wasn't that I didn't care. It was that I'd started believing the lie we're all sold. That there would always be more time, more weekends, more chances to make it right. Meanwhile, at the office, I was getting noticed. I earned little promotions, small bonuses, a few half-hearted claps at monthly team meetings. I told myself that sacrificing time with my family was worth it. I was building a future, right? Sometimes, late at night, I would sit at my kitchen table, phone in hand, thumb hovering over my dad's contact. But the guilt felt too heavy. What would I even say? Sorry for being too busy to be your son? I didn't know then that my time was running out. The day it all started was like any other. Gray, damp, forgettable. I was buried in a spreadsheet when my phone buzzed on my desk. Unknown number. Normally I'd ignore it. But something made me pick up. Maybe it was the way the screen seemed to tremble in my hand. "Is this Daniel Rivers?" a soft voice asked. An unfamiliar woman's voice, I noted. "Yes," I answered, sitting up straighter. "I'm Daniel," I confirmed. "I'm so sorry to inform you. Your father was brought in this morning. Massive heart attack," she said gently. "I'm afraid he didn't make it," she finished. The world tilted. I don't remember what I said next. I think I just mumbled something stupid like, "Okay," and hung up. I sat there for a long time, staring at the blinking cursor on my screen. Numbers swam in front of my eyes. It wasn't possible. My dad was invincible. He fixed roofs, built decks, carried air conditioners by himself. He couldn't just vanish. I stumbled into Mr. Callahan's office without knocking. He looked up from his desk, startled. "I need to take a few days," I said in a hoarse voice. "My father, he passed away this morning," I added numbly. "Of course, Daniel, of course," he said with exaggerated concern. "Take all the time you need," he insisted, standing up. "3 days?" I asked, almost apologetically. "I'll check my email and everything," I promised quickly. "Don't even worry about it," he chuckled, waving me off. "Family first, always," he grinned. I left his office shaking, clutching my car keys so hard they left little dents in my palm. The next 3 days blurred together. Arranging the funeral. Picking out a coffin. Choosing flowers that he wouldn't have cared about. standing in the freezing drizzle at the cemetery, watching the casket lower into the earth. I thought grief would feel louder, more dramatic. But mostly, it felt like a dull weight in my chest, making it hard to breathe. Friends and distant relatives murmured condolences I barely heard. I nodded and thanked them like a robot. All I wanted was to go back, to one of those nights when my dad sat across from me at the kitchen table, laughing about some stupid TV show. To call him just to say hi, and not because it was an emergency. Instead, I stood there in a rented suit, pretending to be strong. Pretending I deserved to be called a son. After the funeral, I sat alone in my car for almost an hour. I didn't want to go home. Home meant an empty apartment, unread emails, life rushing on like nothing happened. My phone buzzed again, work emails piling up, deadlines creeping closer. Meetings rescheduled, just in case. I returned early. "You'll need to get back soon," my coworker Ryan texted. "They're acting weird about your leave," he warned. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I turned off my phone and tossed it into the back seat. Let them wait. For once, they could wait. By the fourth morning, I felt the pressure clawing at the edges of my mind. Grief didn't vanish just because the world decided it was time for me to move on. It sat there, heavy and stubborn, refusing to let me forget. But emails were stacking up, and I knew that if I stayed away any longer, the cracks would widen beyond repair. I put on my stiff work clothes, the same ones I wore to the funeral, and drove to the office with a pit in my stomach. The parking lot looked the same. The chipped asphalt, the broken lamppost that had been out for months. Everything was normal. Except it wasn't. The moment I walked inside, something was off. Conversations stopped when I passed. People avoided my eyes. Some offered those quick, tight-lipped smiles, the kind that said, "Not my problem," more than "sorry for your loss." I sat at my desk, powered on my computer, and tried to drown myself in spreadsheets. Focus, survive the day, a notification popped up almost immediately. Meeting request, Mr. Callahan, 10 a.m., mandatory. My hands went cold. At exactly 10, I stood outside his office, staring at the wood grain of the door, willing myself to move. I knocked. "Come in," Mr. Callahan said briskly. I stepped inside. He didn't smile this time. He didn't even offer a fake, "How are you holding up?" His laptop was open, a single document displayed, one I couldn't quite see. "Daniel, please, have a seat," he said coolly. I sat down, feeling like a kid sent to the principal's office. "I'm going to get straight to the point," he said, folding his hands together. "While you were away, certain responsibilities were neglected," he stated firmly. "My father died," I reminded him, my voice cracking. "I had your approval to leave," I added desperately. "Unfortunately, without formal documentation, verbal agreements don't suffice," he said smoothly, like he'd rehearsed it. "But you said—" I began, my stomach dropping. "I understand this is a difficult time," he interrupted with fake sympathy. "But from a business perspective, we have to consider the overall impact," he continued. I blinked at him, trying to make sense of the words. They sounded like English, but they didn't feel real. "You're firing me," I said hollowly. "We're terminating your employment effective immediately," he confirmed, pretending to regret it. "You approved my leave," I said again, my voice rising. "You said family first," I accused, gripping the arms of the chair. "I'm afraid without a written record, my hands are tied," he lied smoothly. "You're lying," I whispered, feeling heat rise behind my eyes. "I recommend you handle this professionally, Daniel," he warned, his voice cooling even further. I stood up so fast the chair toppled over behind me. The noise made a few heads turn outside the glass wall. "This is wrong," I said, my voice shaking with rage. "Security will escort you to collect your belongings," he said, already looking back at his laptop. I wanted to shout, I wanted to flip his desk over and demand the truth, but something inside me froze. The fight drained out like someone pulled a plug. I stormed out, ignoring the wide eyes of my coworkers. Ryan stood up halfway from his cubicle, but sat down quickly when Mr. Callahan's assistant glared at him. At my desk, a man in a gray uniform was already waiting. He looked bored, holding a cardboard box. "Let's get this over with," he muttered, not meeting my eyes. I threw my things into the box with shaking hands. A couple of pens, a framed photo of my dad and me at my college graduation, a stress ball shaped like a brain that someone gave me during Secret Santa 3 years ago. So much of my life in this place had come down to these worthless trinkets. As I shoved the last of my things into the box, I caught Ryan's eye. He mouthed something I couldn't hear. Maybe sorry, maybe good luck. It didn't matter. On the way out, I passed the bulletin board. New pictures had been pinned up, smiling faces, cheerful captions, as if nothing had happened. I carried my box across the parking lot, the sky above me the color of wet cement. My car felt like a coffin. I tossed the box onto the passenger seat and sat behind the wheel, gripping it so hard my knuckles turned white. I didn't turn the engine on. I just sat there, staring at the building. Hexler Solutions, a place that prided itself on loyalty, on family values. Family first. I laughed, a raw, broken sound that filled the car and bounced back at me. Family first, they said. As long as it didn't inconvenience them. As long as it didn't cost them anything. As long as you stayed useful. I wiped my face with the sleeve of my jacket and finally turned the key in the ignition. One last look at the building. One last moment of pretending it had ever been anything but a machine designed to chew people up and spit them out. I pulled out of the parking lot and didn't look back. The first few days after being fired felt like free fall. I didn't tell anyone at first, not my friends, not my few remaining relatives. I couldn't bear the questions, the pitying looks, the inevitable advice. Get back out there. Stay positive. Everything happens for a reason. Instead, I wandered through my apartment like a ghost, existing but not living. On the third day, a thick envelope arrived in the mail. It was a formal termination letter from Hexler Solutions, complete with legal language about violation of company policy and abandonment of duties. Attached was a checklist of company property I was allegedly supposed to return, none of which I even had. I crumpled the letter in my hand. They wanted to erase me, pretend I had been a problem, a burden they were relieved to be rid of. Not even a word about the years I had given them. The box of my belongings sat untouched by the door. Every time I looked at it, rage flared in my chest. But underneath the anger was something colder. Determination. I wasn't going to let them bury me quietly. I pulled out my old laptop and started digging. The first thing I found was the email thread where I had asked for time off. I had forwarded it to myself, just out of habit. There it was, plain as day. My request. Mr. Callahan's casual reply. Take all the time you need. Family comes first. I stared at the words, my heart pounding. Proof. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The next morning, I put on a clean shirt, combed my hair, and drove to a local employment attorney's office. Her name was Valerie Chen, a sharp-eyed woman who listened without interrupting as I spilled out the whole story. When I finally finished, she tapped her pen against her notepad thoughtfully. You have a case, she said calmly. Wrongful termination, retaliation, possibly breach of implied contract, she listed. But it was all verbal, I pointed out, feeling a familiar doubt creeping in. You have the email, she reminded me. And if we can find witnesses to corroborate that your leave was approved, that strengthens your position, she added. Nobody's going to want to cross Hexler, I muttered bitterly. You'd be surprised, Valerie said with a small smile. Sometimes all it takes is one person brave enough to tell the truth, she said. I nodded slowly. Maybe. Just maybe. I spent the next few days reaching out carefully to former coworkers. Most ignored my messages. Some sent awkward apologies, but made it clear they wanted no part of it. Then, Ryan responded. "Meet me at Joe's Diner," he wrote. "Can't talk on the phone?" he added. That night, I sat in a cracked vinyl booth, nursing a coffee that tasted like burnt rubber, waiting. Ryan slid into the booth across from me, looking around nervously. "You're really doing this?" he asked under his breath. "I'm not letting them get away with it," I said firmly. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Look, man, I saw the email," he admitted quietly. "I was there when Callahan said it was okay. Everyone knew you were taking time off," he added. "Would you be willing to put that in writing?" I asked carefully. He hesitated, chewing his lip. "They'll blacklist me," he said miserably. "I'm up for promotion," he whispered. "I get it," I said after a long pause. "You have to look out for yourself," I added, trying not to let the disappointment show. He looked torn. "Maybe there's another way," he said suddenly. "You know Jenna?" "HR?" he asked. "Yeah," I nodded. "She's pissed," he said, leaning closer. "They made her delete your approved leave from the system. She was furious," he whispered. My pulse quickened. "Think she'd talk?" I asked. "I can ask," he said, grimacing. "But be careful. They're watching everyone," he warned. That night, I barely slept. My mind raced with possibilities, with fear, with a tiny flickering hope. The next day, Ryan texted. "Jenna's in," he wrote simply. We arranged to meet at a different diner, this one even seedier than the first. Jenna showed up in a hoodie and sunglasses like she was in a spy movie. "I only have a few minutes," she said briskly. "Thank you for coming," I said sincerely. She glanced around, then slid a flash drive across the table. "I made a copy of the system logs before they wiped them," she said quickly. "It shows your leave was approved," she explained. My fingers closed around the flash drive like it was a lifeline. "Why are you helping me?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Because it's wrong," she said simply. "And because if they did it to you, they'll do it to the next person," she added. I swallowed hard, overwhelmed by gratitude. "I owe you," I said. "You don't owe me anything," she said, standing up. "Just make sure they pay," she said before disappearing out the door. I stared at the flash drive in my hand, feeling a fire ignite inside me. No more being afraid. No more being silent. The next week was a blur of meetings with Valerie, filing paperwork, gathering every shred of evidence I could find. We filed a formal complaint against Hexler Solutions, demanding compensation, an apology, and a full public acknowledgement of their wrongdoing. At first, there was silence. Then, the threats started. An email from a Hexler lawyer warning me about frivolous litigation. A thinly veiled threat that pursuing action could impact future employment opportunities. Anonymous voicemails telling me to drop it before it gets ugly. I saved everything. Valerie wasn't fazed. "This means they're scared," she said coolly. "It's a good sign," she said. Still, it wore me down. Every day felt like a battle against an invisible enemy. I missed my dad more than ever. He would have known what to say, how to keep me grounded. One night, when it felt like it was all too much, I sat in the dark, holding my phone, scrolling through old messages. One stood out, sent just a few weeks before he died. "Don't let the world turn you cold," he had written. "You're better than that," the message read. I closed my eyes, breathing in the words. I wasn't fighting just for myself anymore. I was fighting for every time I had swallowed injustice, every time I had chosen silence over self-respect. The next morning, I woke up early, put on my best suit, and walked into Valerie's office, ready to go to war. "This ends with them admitting what they did," I said firmly. "Or it doesn't end at all," I declared. Valerie smiled slightly. "Now you're ready," she said approvingly. The battle lines were drawn, and this time, I wasn't backing down. The day of the confrontation arrived like a storm I couldn't outrun. Valerie arranged a mediation session with Hexler's legal team. It was supposed to be a neutral meeting to seek a resolution without escalation, as their lawyer put it. I knew what it really was. Damage control. I walked into the conference room, heart hammering against my ribs, flash drive tucked securely in my pocket. Mr. Callahan was already there, sitting at the polished table with 2 corporate lawyers flanking him like bodyguards. He didn't even look at me when I entered. Valerie greeted them with a curt nod and sat beside me. "Let's get started," the lead lawyer said briskly. "We've reviewed Mr. Rivers' allegations," he stated without emotion. "I'm sure you have," Valerie said coolly. "Our client denies any wrongdoing," the lawyer continued. "The leave request was never formally documented, and therefore his absence was unauthorized," he insisted. I leaned forward, my hands flat on the table. "I have proof," I said steadily. Mr. Callahan shifted slightly in his seat. It was the first real sign of discomfort I'd seen from him. Valerie gestured to me. I pulled out the flash drive and handed it to the tech assistant who had been assigned to the session. Within seconds, the screen lit up with copies of my emails, system logs, timestamps, all showing my leave had been approved. Silence fell over the room. The second lawyer, a woman with sharp eyes, clicked through the files rapidly, her lips tightening with each document. "Seems clear to me," Valerie said with a slight smile. The lead lawyer cleared his throat. "Regardless of this evidence, Mr. Rivers failed to meet project deadlines during his absence." He tried weakly. "My father died," I said bluntly. "And you knew it," I added, staring at Mr. Callahan. He finally looked at me, his face a careful mask. "We all have personal challenges," he said evenly. "But business must go on," he muttered. "You lied," I said, my voice rising. "You told me to take all the time I needed," I reminded him. "There was a miscommunication," he said with a dismissive shrug. "No," I said fiercely. "You made a choice," I accused. Valerie placed a calming hand on my arm. "Mr. Rivers also has witnesses willing to testify that the leave was approved verbally and through internal systems," she added crisply. The lawyers exchanged uneasy glances. Mr. Callahan's jaw tightened. "We're prepared to offer a settlement," the lead lawyer said quickly. "Full severance plus 3 months additional pay," he offered. I almost laughed. "You think you can pay me to be silent?" I said bitterly. "It's a fair offer," the woman lawyer said sharply. "Not fair enough," Valerie said calmly, "especially given the damages, the blacklisting threats, and the emotional distress involved," she outlined. Mr. Callahan leaned forward suddenly. "Look, Daniel," he said smoothly. "You're a smart guy. Don't throw your future away over pride," he warned. I stared at him, feeling something inside me break loose. I reached into my folder and pulled out the printed message from my dad, the last real thing he ever sent me. I read it aloud, my voice trembling but clear. "Never let anyone treat you like you're disposable," I said firmly. "My father wrote that to me," I added, locking eyes with Callahan. He looked away first. The room went quiet again, thick with tension. Valerie leaned back in her chair, radiating confidence. "Our demands are simple," she said crisply. "Full compensation for wrongful termination, public acknowledgement of wrongdoing, removal of any blacklisting communications, and a formal apology," she listed. The lawyers huddled together, whispering fiercely. Mr. Callahan sat rigid, his face flushed with anger. "We'll need time to review," the lead lawyer said finally. "You have 48 hours, Valerie said, standing up. "After that, we file publicly," she warned. Without another word, we left the room. Outside, I exhaled shakily, the adrenaline crashing down on me. "You did good in there," Valerie said, clapping me on the back. "I just told the truth," I said quietly. "That's harder than most people realize," she said with a small smile. We walked down the hallway together, leaving Hexler's sterile walls behind. Outside, the sun was shining, warm against my face. It was the first time in weeks I realized I could feel it again. 2 days later, Hexler Solutions caved. They agreed to everything: full compensation, a formal apology letter, removal of any negative internal notes about me, and most importantly, a statement acknowledging that my leave had been approved and that I had been wrongfully terminated. It wasn't about the money. It never was. It was about standing up and forcing them to say the words out loud, forcing them to admit they were wrong. The settlement check arrived by courier. I barely glanced at it. The apology letter was stapled on top, full of the usual cold legal language. We regret any misunderstanding and acknowledge Mr. Rivers' approved leave and contributions to the company. It read flatly. No real remorse. No human emotion. But still, a victory. Valerie called me that evening. "Congratulations," she said warmly. "Thanks," I said quietly. "You did something most people never have the guts to do," she added. "It doesn't feel like I won," I admitted. "Because part of you is still grieving," she said gently. "Winning doesn't erase what you lost," she continued. I stared out the window at the city lights blinking in the dusk. "I think I'm just tired," I said honestly. "Rest," she advised. "Then start living for yourself again," she encouraged before hanging up. Living for myself. The idea felt foreign. For years, my life had revolved around deadlines, performance reviews, the next promotion. I had let them define my worth. I had let them take pieces of me until there was almost nothing left. Not anymore. A few weeks later, I found a job at a small consulting firm. Less money, fewer perks, but a completely different atmosphere. People smiled genuinely. Managers actually listened. On my first day, my new boss, Maria, stopped by my desk with a cup of coffee. "We're glad you're here," she said sincerely. "If you ever need anything, time off, a mental health day, just ask," she offered warmly. "Thank you," I said, feeling something loosen in my chest. She smiled and walked away, leaving me staring at the coffee cup like it was some precious artifact. It wasn't just about a job. It was about being seen as a human being, not a cog in a machine. Slowly, life began to stitch itself back together. I reconnected with old friends. I took long walks without checking my email every 5 minutes. I started volunteering at a community center on weekends, helping kids with their resumes and college applications. I wasn't trying to climb some invisible ladder anymore. I was building something real. 6 months after my father's funeral, I drove out to the cemetery. The sky was a deep blue, the air crisp and cool. I carried a small bouquet of white flowers, the kind my mom used to plant in our front yard when I was little. I stood in front of his grave for a long time. The words stuck somewhere between my heart and my throat. "I did it, Dad," I said finally. I stood up for myself. I continued. A soft breeze stirred the leaves around me. "I'm not letting them turn me into someone bitter," I promised. "I'm trying to be someone you'd be proud of," I whispered. I crouched down and placed the flowers carefully at the base of the headstone. "I miss you," I said simply. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long golden shadows across the grass. I stayed a little longer, talking to him about everything and nothing. When I finally stood up to leave, I felt lighter, stronger. As I walked back to my car, I glanced over my shoulder one last time. Some losses never heal. Some holes never fill. But sometimes, standing in the wreckage, you find something new. Something worth carrying forward. I wasn't the same man who had stumbled into that office begging for 3 days off. I was someone my father would recognize. Someone he would smile at and say, "That's my boy." And that was enough. Thanks for watching.